Welcome to the 11th episode of our podcast. Today I'm joined by Brett from Canada, who came here 33 years ago to teach English in a small town, Bielowet. Today, he's the director and founder of the Ostrava International School. This is Expat Episodes, when new stories begin. I'm Martin, your host, and I'll be guiding you through the stories of expats in the Czech Republic. So, hello, Brett. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's really a pleasure and an honor. Thank you for the invitation.
So, how are you? Let's start with that.
Well, let's see. I think like a lot of people in the orbit that we both work in, I feel that I'm doing something worthwhile, that it can be really exhausting sometimes, but that in the end, it has meaning, and that's kind of how I'd like to live my life. So as we speak this morning, I'm waiting for the coffee that we just had to kick in a little bit more and to begin another busy and hopefully interesting and meaningful day.
So let's start talking about those endeavors that you mentioned. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. So my name is Brett Gray. When I was born, my dad wanted me to be named Charles Gray the Fourth because he's Charles Gray the Third. And my mother said, no way, there has to be part of her name in my name. So they named me Charles Burritt Gray, and there's no Brett in there. And I spent most of my life being called Brett until I came to the Czech Republic, where I had to officially go by my official name. And from time to time, people call me Charles, and I don't know who they're talking to. And the second thing is, I think we missed a huge opportunity for me, because if I had been able to come to the Czech Republic as Charles IV, I think I would have gotten a lot more respect right from the very beginning. That said, the purpose or the reason or what led me to the Czech Republic was a moment in history that was just extremely consequential, and that is the fall of communism in 1989. At that time, I was finishing my studies at the University of Southern California. Part of my intense study regime included sitting on the beach reading, and at that time I was reading Milan Kundera, Skvoretsky. I was reading a lot of Havel, his letters to Olga, his letters to the President Husak, and generally, I was really impressed with this guy who was sitting in prison, writing about democracy and some of the principles that we should be fighting for. And I was sitting on the beach in the freest country in the world, and there was this movement going on, this country that elected a philosopher, playwright as president. And I said to myself, I would really like to find out more. I was finishing my degree in journalism, and I thought this would be a huge opportunity to come to Czechoslovakia for a year or two, try to live among the people, try to understand what was going on. And my goal was to write about the transformation that I was witnessing. And I started by coming over to a small town just outside of Ostrava called Bielowet. There's a gymnasium there, a secondary school that specializes in math and physics, and they had a very active, proactive director at that time who made contact through the Canadian Embassy, and I ended up coming directly to the small town of Bielowet and teaching at the secondary school there, and I loved it. And I, at the same time, as I was trying to write stories about this transition from communism to capitalism, I realized how little I understood about what was really going on here, how my writing was just wrong because I wasn't able to understand the layers of things that were going on in that town at that time. I wasn't aware of the history that this small village called Bielowet, just outside of Ostrava, had for 1,000 years been called Wagstadt. It was a German town, and during World War II, basically the German population, or at the end of World War II, was basically evacuated from that town, and a bunch of new people moved in. And these are all things that are extremely important to the context of understanding the culture, and I didn't understand at that time. So when I was writing, there was always something missing. There was always something I would realize the next day that I hadn't understood, and then I really couldn't submit a story. And at the same time, I was teaching English, and I was teaching English to a bunch of kids that were really hungry for English, and I was meeting their parents who were so hungry for their kids to have the opportunity to be a part of the world that they couldn't be a part of. So many of the parents had to forego their own dreams of seeing the world and being a part of the world, having grown up under communism, and they really wanted their kids to have that chance, and they felt that I was a bridge for that.
Exactly. Needless to say that you were one of the pioneers, right? Like the first Canadian or the first native speaker that they have ever came in touch with, right? After the fall of communism. So it must have been a big deal because before then or until that point, English was taught by, very on a surface level, if at all, right? Because they will just teach Russian at school, so...
Well, that's it. And we had a bunch of Russian teachers who were quickly trying to, requalify as English language teachers. And again, I'm trying to withhold judgment on who behaved in which way at that time. I think communism did a great job of putting the whole country, all of the citizens in very precarious situations, and forcing difficult decisions and using those decisions against its own people. It's extremely complicated situation. What I was able to pick up on when I arrived here was a huge sense of relief for most people, and some fear about the world, and but this opportunity to make some changes that were bubbling up for a long time. And I have to say, for me, it was extremely rewarding at the beginning. I felt it was a little bit strange because, again, Bílovec is a small town, and people would, I'd be walking down the street and I could see people kind of looking and pointing. There's that Canadian guy. And I remember that when I went into my first lesson on the first day of school, the director had actually invited the parents to come in and see, because I guess he had been promising a native speaker for a long time, and nothing. And then I came in January of this, in the middle of the school year. And I remember walking into the classroom, and everybody stood up. I walked in and it got quiet. Everybody stood up. Everybody was looking at me, and I was looking at them, and I didn't really know what to do. And so I just started introducing myself to everybody. And there were 100 people in the room, so I guess I did the first 10, and I had to give up on shaking hands with everybody. And what I found was, it was, in a way, they were trying to show respect. Stand up, be quiet. Like, here comes the Canadian, the teacher. And I was 22 at that time. I didn't feel like a professor. I was just a kid in a way, and I really didn't know how to react to that. And there were these kind of comedic moments. I remember one girl, probably 15 or 16 years old, and I said, "Hi, my name is Brett. What is your name?" And just trying to get the conversation going. And she just burst into tears. She didn't know what to say or how to say it. And I've realized that a big part of this would kind of repeat this kind of the situation where people didn't know what to say, even to the easiest question. What's your name? How are you? And the confrontation was, people had been brought up to be so afraid of expressing their own ideas, their own thoughts, even introducing themselves, taking the mask off, let's say, and just trying to have normal conversation. It was difficult for the parents. It was difficult for the kids. And I felt that, that was part of my job, to try to have normal conversation with the kids, to redefine respect you don't respect the teacher because they're older and they know everything, and that you have to just hold on to every word that they say, but that respect it's a communication, it's a relationship of listening and understanding the other. And I felt my life had a real purpose at that moment, and that I was really helping kids to go out to the world, and especially at this gymnasium, focusing on math and physics. In the first couple of years, I had some really, really talented students who wanted to try to get to American universities, and we sat down regularly, and we practiced writing essays. We prepared for some of the entrance examinations. We went through the results and were constantly trying to improve stuff. And very early on, we had this huge success. One of them got a full scholarship to Princeton in physics, and the other got a full scholarship to the University of Chicago in mathematics. And these are two extremely prestigious American universities that were accepting kids out of a small town in Bilovets who had they definitely had the science ability, but more than that, they rolled up their sleeves and they really started to focus on their English and expression and sharing and communicating. And with those early successes, I felt, really my life has purpose here. But what I found even more is that this school that could produce some real geniuses, it got really smart kids, and it was able to really help those really smart kids be successful at university. But there were a bunch of other kids that also needed support, and more support. In a way, it's quite easy to teach the geniuses because you just let them go. It's the kids that are coming from difficult backgrounds, families that are struggling, kids that need support. And I have to say that after a number of years, I found that my approach was not ultimately what many of the families were looking for, because in many ways the Czech system was not adjusting quickly. The Czech educational system was for a long time still focused on memorization of facts, of a kind of blind respect for the teacher as the holder of all knowledge. And as technology evolved, as the internet evolved, as the opening up of the Czech Republic evolved, I struggled more and more within the system to feel some satisfaction. And after 10 years, I had to stop for a while. And I almost felt from time to time that my approach was almost hurting some of the kids, because I was not forcing them to memorize the stuff that they need to get into Czech universities. I was trying to expand their horizons and get them to communicate and to speak and to find themselves a bit.
So that's a bit of a time skip, right? Because you've mentioned that you came here as a 20-something-year-old, right? Fresh out of university, one of the pioneers of English language here in this region, or in Bilovec at the very least, right? Why did you decide to settle in, to be here for another 10, 20 plus years, right? What prompted that?
Well, first and foremost, I became the dad of an absolutely fabulous little boy, who's now a big boy, Jonas, the love of my life, and I felt a very strong connection that what I was doing at the school and what I wanted for my son are linked together. And first and foremost, I had to make a decision as a 23-year-old if I'm going to really invest in this region and invest my life here, or go back to Canada, or partially put my dream on hold, which had been, I'd like to come to Czechoslovakia for a year or two and then see the rest of the world. Yeah. And when you become a parent, those kind of dreams have to be put on hold for a while. And I think luckily in the end, I was able to create something where I just invite the rest of the world to come to me as the director of our international school now. So I don't feel that dream has been arrested at all. I think, is just to get back to the core issue. The core question is what what makes you stay, what makes you invest. And um, I felt that in Bilovets, I found people of value, people that sound, I don't know, I wouldn't, maybe that's not a nice way to put it, but people that I could care about and people who I could build something with. As modest as that was, as I said at the beginning, there's this hunger to try to do something, and that was very encouraging for me. Again, that sense of purpose is so important. Money was not great, for sure, but the sense of I can do something, I really felt enabled and empowered in a way that I probably wouldn't have been in Los Angeles or Montreal, because I was different, because it was because I wasn't good at Czech language. It was because I was full of questions. It was because I was hungry. And I think that's an extremely important thing for anybody in life. If you feel that you can go out to the world and that you're respected for who you are, you're accepted for who you are, it gives you the feeling of empowerment that you can actually make something. And that was very, very strong.
And how did you adjust to this culture? And let's say, I don't know really how to put it, but did you think of Bílovec or Czechia or this region as underdeveloped? Because you came from Canada, you've spent some time in the USA, where there was a rapid growth, right? It was around 1980s, where they've been dealing with civil rights issues, right? And in the meanwhile, here in Czech Republic, we've just been recovering from the fall of communism. So, how did you adjust? What did you think about it?
I guess I would tell the story. So I was studying at the University of Southern California, private university, very expensive university. And I went there as a kid with no money, basically. I got a scholarship that covered almost all of my expenses, and the rest I would just kind of work it off at various jobs to pay. I came into life in this extremely rich city of Los Angeles as a very humbly. And I guess what was really attractive about Bilovets, I think, can be told in the story of a Sunday evening. I was watching a show on television, a cartoon for adults that had just started a couple of years earlier. It was about this strange-looking yellow family of four called The Simpsons that were doing social commentary on this totally new TV chain called Fox Television. It was new at that time. And I was in the middle of watching The Simpsons, and I heard outside of my door the screeching of brakes, a big smash of something, and gunshots. And this was in the late 1980s, and at that time in Los Angeles, there were a lot of gang fights between the Bloods and the Crips, these two gangs that were competing for territory in the Czech Republic, territory in Los Angeles. And crack cocaine was a big thing at that time, and it was all messed up. I went downstairs to see that my car had just been my lovely Datsun B210 30-year-old car that my dad had saved up to help me, so I would have something to drive around this big city. And it was totally smashed up in the middle of the road. And as I went out to see the damage, there was already a police helicopter flying overhead with the spotlight on, just like you would imagine in a drama, on TV. And then the spotlight was on me in front of my car, and then the police cars, 3 or 4, drove up. They opened the door, hands up. Got my hands up in front of my car saying, I didn't do anything, this is my car, I'm the victim here. And so everybody calmed down and started talking with the police about what happened, and they started measuring and taking pictures. And as I was standing off to the side, a young kid came up to me and said, "Don't tell them anything, and you'll be okay." And then he walked away, and it just felt like that's a part of this America that you might see on TV, but you don't realize that people live through these things. I'm not saying that's the American story, but it's part of the American story. And uh, and then you come to a place like Bilovets. There's no guns. Yeah, didn't see a helicopter. In fact, all the helicopters that belonged at the military base out in wasn't in Frýdek, but somewhere out there was a Russian base, and they were moving all the soldiers back to Russia. It felt like a very calm place where you can kind of be yourself and not feel threatened. Um, and so if you talk about, the question was about poverty, about underdeveloped. In many ways, yeah, Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia at that time, in comparison to a lot of what I saw growing up, was underdeveloped. But at the same time, there wasn't this incredible dichotomy between rich and poor. It felt to me like everybody in Czechoslovakia was at relatively the same level and okay, a little bit lower than, but maybe not suffering from some of the really deep-rooted problems that are extremely difficult to change in some American and Canadian, and I would say world cities. I felt like, I also had the chance to live in Paris for 2 years as a student, and there are places outside of the center of Paris that you really don't want to go to. They're dangerous because they've become just areas of poverty with no hope. And here, I guess I always felt that there was some hope, even in some of the harder places. So sorry for the long answer, but yeah.
No worries. It's. I think that you're drawing a beautiful picture, right? Because I've never would have thought that there would be gang wars in 1980s. Because that's something that's not really taught at schools, right?
Sure.
We would discuss civil rights movements and all that, but not gang wars.
Well, and that's it. For me, the United States is such a contrast, and I am American. My whole family are Americans. I was born in Canada. My dad was a deserter from the war in Vietnam, and so that's why I'm really the only Canadian in my family, and I'm very proud to be Canadian. I feel myself as Canadian, but there's a strong part of me with American roots, and shortly after I founded the Ostrava International School,
I actually wanted to get into that. You've had some experience as a teacher at the school in Bielefeld, but
Yeah.
you've originally you studied journalism, right? So
Right.
what prompted you to start the international school of Ostrava? Was it the approach that you had that some of the parents didn't really agree with, if I can put it that way?
So I will maybe take a little step back, and I'll use this as a bridge. I think because I studied journalism, because of the way I grew up, what I read, the people who inspired me, including Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela and Lech Wałęsa and Havel, I have inside of me, I think, of the strong belief of trying to make the world a better place, or at least my part of the world, a little bit better place than I found it. And that, of course, is a really challenging thing to do. And I always wanted to have a school where kids are in the process of learning and growing and accepting and trying to communicate and trying to find in themselves a way to express themselves. I feel very strongly about democratic principles, and that democracy is a really messy thing. But I feel strongly that schools have to help kids understand civics and be citizens. The challenge of America, and it's the challenge of the Czech Republic, is democracy, I think, is a bit of a dance. And you make some progress, and then there's a reaction, and there's a counterbalance. I had the opportunity in Ostrava to speak with Madeleine Albright shortly after we founded the Ostrava International School. And I asked her at that time, how am I supposed to talk with my kids about democracy when we've got George Bush as president? And I look back now and I'm like, boy, those were the golden days. But at the time, it seemed to me that a lot of what I cared about and what I felt was important was being pushed back against in American politics at that time. And she said, for her, the thing that she's constantly reminding her own students, because she's also a university professor at Georgetown, she said, everything that we're declaring as the United States, everything that we have in our Constitution, in our Bill of Rights, in the way we have a separation of powers, it's a goal. We're not there. And the whole history of the U.S., and I think it's the same now in Czech Republic, is you make 2 steps forward and then 1 step back, and sometimes 3 steps back, and then you try again and you try to move it forward. But I have the sense of satisfaction that I believe in the Czech Republic over the last 30 years, we've made huge step forwards for our individual freedoms, our ability to express ourselves, our ability to find out who we are and what we want to be, and to make stuff like that. It's messy, and sometimes we really feel things are going in the wrong direction, but it feels to me like we have a corrective to put it in the right direction. For me, the reason that I had to leave the school in Bílovec and try to create something different was that I felt I was fighting against the Czech state system. I was fighting against the way that universities actually accept students, and which is really based on memorization and facts, and not so much on your own understanding and knowledge and how you can apply that. And I feel now in the world of, even in Czech universities, that's starting to change. I feel with the Czech Ministry of Education, it is opening up more. I feel that Czech directors at Czech schools are able to have a little bit more leeway and freedom to find directions that reflect the needs of what the country and what the country's industries need. But it's an extremely slow process. And back in 1999, 2000, 2001, when I decided to leave the school in Bílovec, I started working for the city externally at first, doing some translations, working with the promotional material. I was working with the region when there were visits from Czech Invest or from other organizations that were trying to get new investment into the region. I started to actually make the presentations and talk about the region and how it's open for business, and how I, as a Canadian, I'm here already for a number of years and it's fine. Don't worry, you can trust, you can build here, you can, I feel very proud of having been part of that transition from heavy industry, steel factories and coal mines that had thousands and thousands of workers that were now being reduced at that time, a lot of unemployment, a lot of insecurity, very few Czech companies willing or able to invest in this region. We had to find investors from outside of the Czech Republic to be the creators of the new jobs here. And I felt a huge satisfaction being a part of turning Hrabova into an industrial area now that employs thousands of people, being a part of the decision for Hyundai to come to this region, a very small part, but in the contract, in the initial contract with Hyundai, there was the opportunity for the kids of management to go to our school because there would be an international school in our region. I understood after a few years of talking with potential investors that we have a lot of good things going on here in Ostrava, but of the 10,000 things that they have to resolve if they're going to make an investment decision, they need to know that there's a highway that they can get their stuff in and out of. So the D1 was under construction. They need to know that their families can go shopping and have a Starbucks or go to Benetton or something like that. Carolina was just being finished at that time. And there has to be an international school. These investors were getting offers from all kinds of cities all over Central Europe. And in the end, it really came down to 3 or 4, 5 things that don't really have much to do with the actual investment itself. It's, will my family be okay if I bring my management teams over here? Can their kids go to school? at that point, there was no interest from any of the existing international schools in Prague to open up a branch in Ostrava because there was no international community here. And there's no international community partially because there's no school. Chicken and egg. And that's when I started inquiring at the city and the region if we don't want to try to make something like that happen, because we're constantly just hearing, no international school. Okay, thank you. We'll go to Poland. We'll go to Hungary. We'll go somewhere else. And so in many ways, the creation of the Ostrava International School is a project of trying to help with the economic revitalization of the city and the region, married, I hope, to the mission and belief that I would like to see in the school, that is open and inclusive. And I mean, which by definition it has to be if we're bringing people from all over the world into an environment where nobody speaks Czech, and they know beforehand that most of them are not going to stay here for more than 2 or 3 or 4 years before they go back to their countries. It's not possible for a 15-year-old kid to come from China, for example, and learn Czech and do Czech biology, chemistry, physics, Czech language, maturita, and be successful and do all of that, and then go back to China where they really won't use the Czech very much, most likely. That need for having a truly international school that accepts people where they are, tries to figure out how to get them to the next level, is it's almost like we tried to ultimately say this is an investment incentive, that the region and the city should be supporting the creation of a school like this, because it just makes the investment much easier and the flow of people much easier. And then that was my introduction to local Czech politics, which I discovered doesn't always see its interests as aligned the way I do. But that's another story.
You know what? You're making my job really easy, because every question that I have in my head, you answer by by just talking about the topic. So I think that's really nice. But what I wanted to ask you is that I know or I have a vague idea of your school, and I know that it's not only for children at an elementary or secondary level. So, how old does the child have to be in order for you to put them into school?
Yeah, when we first opened the school, we were focusing on the secondary level, and then we opened a middle school level, and then a primary level, and we have a kindergarten level. So essentially, the kids at our school are age 3 to 19. What we have found is that often when a family comes to Ostrava, also not knowing much about Ostrava, and we have, for example, many people from Korea at our school, and if we compare the third largest city in Korea has 4 million people, and the third largest city in the Czech Republic has 300,000.
Yeah.
So they don't know much about Ostrava when they arrive here. They know that they're going to be here for 2 or 3 years on a work contract, and then most likely go home or go to another country. What we're finding is that when people actually come to Ostrava, it's not bad here. They like it, and they're renewing the contract, sometimes a second, a third, a fourth time. And we have more and more of our kids who are staying, and they want to graduate from our school because they know that we're serious about education. We're not trying to prepare everybody for Harvard, because it's just not realistic, and it's not fair to put that kind of pressure on the kids. But our kids know that at our school, they're accepted where they are, and we will get them to the next level, and we will focus on what they care about and what's interesting for them. We listen a lot to the kids. We really try to have a communication with the parents, and we find that very often they want to stay longer than they initially intended. And I think they also want to stay longer because over the last 30 years, Ostrava really has changed. Czechs are often the last people to notice this, but people who are coming from other countries see you can live here. it's quite a green place. There are some nice mountains really close nearby. We're within striking distance for nice long weekends to Vienna and Prague and Krakow and a bunch of places. And that's nice. That's nice. I don't need to live in a big city. I can visit and have my cultural experience. And in the meantime, my kids can live in Ostrava and they can have a fairly normal, safe kids' life if they want. And that's a really big thing for some of our parents, to feel like the world is crazy, but Ostrava as such is actually a pretty nice place for a kid to grow up.
What about when my kid graduates from your school? What's the certificate? Is it like acknowledged within the Czech system or worldwide? How does it work exactly?
Okay, so again, it's always in the Czech system, it's a bit of a challenge, but it's not a problem. It just, as many things, there's a process to go through that can take a little bit of time. So ultimately, at our school, when you graduate, you're primarily focusing on the international. It's the equivalent of an international maturita, an international graduation exam. It's called the International Baccalaureate Diploma. This is an extremely recognized diploma at universities around the world. It's starting to be understood a little bit more in the Czech Republic, especially Charles University and Masaryk and the bigger universities understand that the academic level is really very high. In fact, at many universities, if you graduate with the International Baccalaureate Diploma program that we offer, and you don't have to take some of the university level programs, you'll get automatic credit for them. So that's very motivating, especially if you're sending a child to university in the United States. You can actually save a lot of money because they don't have to do those courses at university. The second thing is that, again, we have students for whom maybe that diploma program is a bit of a challenge and it's not necessarily the direction that they want to go. And so they can finish with our own high school diploma, and that's recognized and acknowledged by the United States government. And essentially they can apply to universities all over the world with our graduation certificate, our diploma. And that's also recognized locally. The process is, though, because Czech universities, our school is not registered as a Czech school. It's registered as a foreign school on the Czech Republic. So there's a process in Czech called nostrification, where we go to the local regional authority. They see the program that we've provided. They compare it to the Czech program, and we organize it so that the equivalent is there. And then after a couple of weeks, they get a stamp and they've got their certificate. So it's, and I have to say, I'm very pleased to see right now that our status is not that all of our foreign students are only going to foreign universities and all of our Czech students are only going to Czech universities. It's really a big mishmash. And last year we had 2 of our Korean students accepted to medicine at Charles University. And so they had to go through the nostrification process for Charles University. And we started the discussion this morning of how are you? And I said, I'm sometimes a little tired. But these are the moments that really give me joy, because I remember these kids when they join our school and the level of English they have and the uncertainty that they have when they're in this totally new environment with different food, different languages, different alphabet. And now, and I strongly believe because of the approach that we have as a school, they are pursuing their dreams. They're studying medicine at one of the best schools in the Czech Republic, and we help them get there. And that wouldn't be my dream to study medicine. Blood is an issue, but it's their dream, and if we were part of helping to get them there, that's what it should be all about.
So that's your proudest achievement, that you are building an international community within an international school, and you're this safe haven for kids, and you're helping them reach their ambitions, their goals, and their dreams.
That's it. And I have to say, uh, for me, a prestigious school is not a school that pre-selects the best students and only allows those excellent academic students to go off into the world. For me, uh, in the last few years, we've had our students who've been accepted to Columbia University and to New York University, like really high level Ivy League or almost Ivy League level schools. And then we've had kids that really came to the school in a difficult position, family or whatever, without going into too many details, and they managed to complete their secondary school education, and they've also been accepted to a local university or a university in the Netherlands or somewhere in Europe. Nobody believed in them. Nobody believed in some of the kids that they would have what it takes, but they got the opportunity. They got the love and the support, understanding, a lot of patience. And I believe that those kids, for me, that's a prestigious school. That's the school that helps those kids go out and realize that they are worth something, that they can do something in the world. And I believe they are going to do something in the world, just as much as those kids who've been accepted to the top flight universities. That's the kind of school that I would like, and that's the kind of school that, in order for it to exist, sometimes we have to fight with the norms of Czech education system and, I would say, international educational norms. I don't want to complain solely about the Czech education system. There's a lot that does work, and there's a lot of work to do still. But I'm glad that I can function in my international sphere, and that my relationship, my discussions with the Czech ministry are fairly limited. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we are nearing the end of our episode, so I'm gonna have 5 final questions for you
Okay.
for our quick pick rubric. Please, let's keep it short.
I'll
and-
try. It's so hard. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So how do you keep your cultural roots alive?
Visit home.
Visit home often?
Not as often as I would have liked. And this is hard to keep short, but I've been here 33 years. When I visit home, I realize what I've missed. And I think what we try to cultivate in our students, and what I firmly believe in, is that you be proud of your culture, bring it with you, have it be part of your identity. Everybody at our school, we are not Czechs, we are not Canadians or Koreans or Indians, we're 39 nationalities at our school now, and we have to be proud of where we come from, cultivate that, never be embarrassed about who you are, and just draw upon the things that you love. And Canada's an easy one to draw upon, right? Because everybody thinks it's a great place full of nature and clean air and that sort of thing. So.
I was about to ask if that home that we're talking about is Canada or America. So it's Canada.
I guess in that way it is, but I am also a big believer that of the expression "home is where the hearth is," where your fireplace is, where the place is that keeps you warm. And I have to say, I lived in Canada for 16 years. I've lived in Czech Republic for 33, so I'm basically 2 times more Czech than Canadian at this point. And I try to have my home inside my heart.
I see. So if your time in Ostrava or this region was a movie or a song, which one would it be?
Oh, geez, that's an easy question. I would need more time to think about that. If I were to, and just because there's so many opportunities, I'm a big fan of Hamilton now. The play, it's something that is really close to my heart and to the heart of my wife, and even a growing number of people at school now, as we can't help but talking about that. And the relationship between Alexander Hamilton and George Washington, especially when George Washington is going to finish as a president, and there's all of this pressure for him to continue because he's such a good leader and he motivates the people. But George Washington is saying, you have to teach them how to say goodbye. He said, if all of the things that we've been fighting for are going to have any meaning, it can't be on my shoulders. It has to be something that lives of in and of itself. And so there has to be someone else as president now, and then someone after that. We have to learn this process of the democracy will work if the people are keeping it going. So I guess let's just take the whole 2.5 hour musical as the song or movie that is most inspiring.
Beautiful. What makes you want to call Ostrava your home?
That's a really big question because, and I think it's a difficult question for any expat, and that is, do I have the right to call it my home? There's always a sense when you're an expat that as hard as you want to believe that you belong, and as hard as you work to be a part of that community, there's always something that makes you a little bit foreign to that community. And in my case, it's the fact that after 33 years, when I open my mouth in Czech, it's still, I'm not local. I'm not local. I guess I feel whether the locals like it or not, it is also my home now. And I just have to realize that even for a lot of the locals, they weren't necessarily born in Ostrava. A lot of them moved, their parents moved to find work in Ostrava from other parts of the Czech Republic or from Slovakia. Again, I feel I've made something here, I believe in it, and that's where home is, I guess.
What's your special hidden gem in Ostrava? Where do you like to, spend time?
This is gonna sound maybe a little too simple, but I really love the park right by the river, right by the city hall. I like that because I have a sense of community there. There's a great little kids park that is a place that I believe has provided more sanity to more families in Ostrava than any other place because they can let their kids run and have a coffee and relax. People can walk their dogs. It's amazing the number of conversations that start up because two dogs are sniffing each other while the owners are starting up a conversation. I love it that my kids can play by the river and imagine and discover and be pirates and feed the ducks. And so that's the gem for me. That's where I feel a strong sense of community.
What about tips for a trip to Canada?
I had the chance this summer for the first time in my life to visit the Yukon very quickly. That I found amazing. I love Montreal, where I grew up, but that's maybe because when I go to Montreal, I have all of these memories of childhood, and that's always nice. But I think I love Montreal also because it gave me a chance to grow up in a really international environment. It gave me some French to work with as I was growing up. I grew up there also in a very interesting political moment with a big resurgence of French identity and nationalism in a way. It wasn't always healthy, but I think it was important to see. So I guess culturally, I love Montreal, and in terms of the power of nature, the Yukon. But bring some bear spray with you. Yeah, but yeah, very majestic, very beautiful.
Yeah, so we're at the end of our episode right now, unfortunately. But thank you so much,
been a
Brett,
pleasure.
for
Thank you.
joining me. It was amazing. I know how scarce your time is, so we really do appreciate it. And thank you for cultivating this international community in Ostrava and for bringing those foreign talents in and trying to make Ostrava a better place.
Well, and thank you for the work that you're doing, having this kind of a podcast and creating a sense of community for people who are coming here. It's also extremely important. So in this way, I think we're on the same team.
Definitely. It's good to have you on our team, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I will see you guys in the next episode. So goodbye. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Ostrava Expat Center with the media partnership from magazine Patrio.